Good morning. My name is Terry Butler, and I've been a regular attender for here at Men of Hope for, I think, going on 8 years. And I keep coming back. Each Wednesday I keep coming back, and it's because, as it says in the vision statement, it fills me with hope. But it also does some other things for me. I love Wednesdays because it really does equip me for the week. It helps me, you have a great worship experience on Sundays, and then on Wednesdays, I come back and I get to fellowship with some great guys, which really, again, fills me with hope and helps me grow deeper into my relationship with Jesus Christ, which is really, I think, the basis for success in life. And so we're going to talk about, for the next 7 weeks, the pyramid of success. And as Chris mentioned, it is a book by Coach Wooden, and it has just some building blocks that he developed over a lifetime. I think when he wrote this book, he was 94 years old. And he really developed different characteristics that he cemented in his life and that he cemented in others that he coached, and we're going to talk about that over the next 7 weeks. And so how this book came to be a feature for the next 7 weeks came out of a discussion as the group that I'm leading, and we were going through the book of Hebrews, and we were in the last chapter. And I just want to read to you the first 5 verses, because they really are. If you read Scripture, you'll know as well as I do that there are building blocks that we can apply to our lives. And so, read these 5 verses. And this is the new Revised King. This is the new Revised King James version. I like to use different Bibles, and this one I think says it well. Let brotherly love continue. Do not forget to entertain strangers, for by doing some have unwittingly entertained angels. Remember the prisoners as if chained with them, those who are mistreated, since you yourselves are in the body also. Marriage is honorable among all, and the bed undefiled, but fornicators and adulterers God will judge. Let your conduct be without covetousness. Be content with such things as you have. For he himself said, I will never leave you nor forsake you, so we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? And so, as we were reading that and discussing that in our group, Larry Haynes, who's sitting in the back, he said, that list reminds me of a book I read. And I actually used it in business. I used it to help guide me as I was managing others, and to help build characteristics in those that I managed. And so he said Coach Wooden's book, The Pyramid of Success, Building Blocks for a Better Life. And so I picked it up and I read it, and I said, this really is a good book. I love the fact that in this book, it helps us define what success looks like to me from a godly perspective. One of the things that Coach Wooden was really good at was focusing on trying to make yourself better, but not comparing yourself to others. What is it that am I operating to my full potential that God's given me? And so I really like that in the book, that what does success look like, and what does it take for you to be successful? Because in the end, the beauty of getting older is the fact that I have a rear view mirror I can look back on and think, Man, there's so many things I could have done differently, but I learned from those, and what I want to do is be able to finish well. That is my goal, and so how do I do that? By staying closer to Christ in my walk. And so the pyramid of success has building blocks, and over the next 7 weeks, there's going to be guest speakers like myself, Larry Haynes. There's going to be numerous pastors that are going to help explore 3 building blocks at a time, so that as you can self-reflect and in some of the breakout discussion groups talk about these individual building blocks and how you have helped build those in your own lives, or are those building blocks that you need to start working on. And so one of the things that Coach Wooden did with this pyramid of success, he starts with a couple of cornerstones. So industriousness, or another term for that, hard work, and on the other end, enthusiasm. And then there's another building block next to the industriousness called friendship. And I'm going to talk about those 3 this morning. I'm going to help explain what he talks about in the book regarding these 3 building blocks. And then throughout the week, we're going to, next week, somebody will talk about loyalty, cooperation, self-control. And somebody else, and slowly we'll build that pyramid. But really, the thing that holds this whole thing together is faith. Because without faith, everything starts to crumble. Life breaks down, relationships break down. And so it's really important to think about how you hold everything together as you go through life, because there's a lot being thrown at you. So Coach Wooden would attribute his success, and he was, as Chris said, the most successful coach in the NCAA history. And he really focused on essentials. That really was his key to success in helping to make sure that he helped his team know exactly when they came to practice. They practiced for an hour and a half. After an hour and a half, they were done. And that helped instill in his guys the ability to work hard during that period of time and know exactly they wanted to leave nothing left off. They wanted to make sure they gave their all for that hour and a half, because that's all the practice they were going to have each day for preparing for the next game. He built men out of boys. As a coach, his goal was not to just build really good basketball players and to have the most successful team. That really wasn't his goal. His goal was to build men that after basketball, they would go on and contribute in life to their families and those that they worked for to be light bearers. He didn't proselytize to his guys, but those guys that did ask where he got his strength, he was very open about his faith, much like in a work environment for those that have had an opportunity to share their faith with somebody during difficult times that people are having. It really does make a difference. And I think as dedicated as you are getting up this early in the morning to come in, to be filled with hope, whether you know it or not, those that you are around during the day recognize there's something different about you. And so he lived out his faith by cementing the personal qualities. He represented those not only on and off the court, but with his family, and with his grandkids and his great-grandkids. And one of the things that I really like that he said, there's a quote in the first chapter that says, "Don't try to be better than someone else, but rather always try to be the best you can be." And so, again, he really instilled in people the ability to understand my gifts, my talents. How can I use those to better those around me, better the world around me? And in doing so, not comparing myself to Larry or Daryl or others in my group, but understand that I have gifts and talents that they don't have, and they build me up just like I build them up. And so, in in looking at this book, Coach Wooden will talk about hard work, for example, or enthusiasm, or how to build good friendships. In the first 3 chapters, those two being on the far ends, hard work and enthusiasm being the cornerstones. But his co-author, a guy by the name of Jay Carty, he shows the biblical roots of each of these building blocks, which I think, as we just talked about with Hebrews, that list, those are building blocks for how to develop and finish your life well. Because I think that there are times when if I didn't walk close to Christ, or I was chasing the shiny objects in life, things didn't start to go real well. And so I think that this book is just a great reminder. These verses are great reminders of what are those building blocks in life that. So I want to talk about success, because I think that Coach Wooden says that success is that satisfaction you get out of life, knowing that you did your best. And this is a collage of what I would picture today being success for me. And there's an old picture up here of my granddad, Thomas Michael Butler. My brother was named after my dad and my granddad. And my granddad, by all worldly standards, was successful. He was a vice president of the First National Bank of Chicago before J.P. Morgan Chase bought it out. He had a corner office. He had a staff. And he had a country club that he belonged to, played golf regularly, and spent his winter down in Palm Springs in Florida. But I never really knew my grandfather very well. I only saw him on holidays. I never met any of his friends. So I really didn't know his backstory, but I did know that he was a Catholic. I grew up in a Catholic church, and I am what I would refer to as a Reformed Catholic. My wife and I, we got married by a Lutheran bishop and a Catholic priest, so we were double blessed. But as I look back, personally, I admired my granddad for his success, what I saw as success. And I always wanted to be a vice president. So I was very goal-oriented. I was a very hard worker. So industriousness was a characteristic and a cornerstone, as mentioned in the pyramid. Something that I saw that if I worked hard, I could get ahead and I could get what I needed in life. And then I approached things with a lot of enthusiasm, and in doing so, made a lot of friends. But when I got to that level of achievement in life, I figured out that I had my priorities kind of backwards. Because at that point, I was very compartmentalized. You know how the Israelites wandered in the desert for 40 years? I could look back and say I wandered in the desert for 40 years because I was very compartmentalized. I would go through life, and it was work first, it was family second, it was God third. And I know that's it's kind of the way I approached life. But God was always there. He was my co-pilot, but I didn't let him drive a lot. And so when I got to that level of being a vice president at Vermeer down in Pella, I did that for 6-7 years during some very difficult times for the business. And I looked back, and my wife and I had that conversation because I was working long hours. I was, it was just, I had things all screwed up. My wife helped me recognize the fact that it needed to be God first, family second, and job third. And so I approached Bob Vermeer about resigning my position as vice president, taking over and doing some other portions of the business and being a technical advisor for the charitable foundation, really being able to integrate my faith into my work. And Bob, I knew that he could just let me go and say, well, that's nice, but we don't have anything in that capacity. And but he grabbed my hands in his office, and we stood there and we prayed. And the next 12 years, I can tell you, was a real step of faith. But I traveled the world on behalf of the foundation doing mission projects. Went places not few people have been, doing different projects in some very sketchy situations. And I'd love to tell some stories about that, but I don't have enough time. But really, figuring out that God first, family second, and job third, and organizing those priorities, maintaining that hard work ethic, maintaining that level of enthusiasm, but developing friendships all over the world, not just locally. And so, I've been married for 45 years, and like most marriages, you have ups and downs, but through the grace of God and the love of my wife, I would not trade that for anything. I have 2 wonderful grandchildren. My youngest, Theodore, is 1 year old, and he is just the epitome of enthusiasm, just a happy kid. My granddaughter, Guinevere, is just one of those that is very inquisitive and has an abundance of energy, and I'm sure, as what I've seen so far at 4 years old, approaches life with that cornerstone of hard work. And so, my group that I have had the distinct honor of facilitating discussions with around different books of the Bible for 7 years are more than just acquaintances. They're dear friends. They're those 3 a.m. friends that I can call. We've exchanged phone numbers and emails, and we share life. These guys have shared some stories that are gut-wrenching and things that have drawn us all closer together. And those are friendships that I will cherish truly for the rest of my life. There's another group on every other Monday we meet. We talk about the current headlines from a biblical perspective before we go out and herald those to others. It's called Headlines, Heralds, and Holiness. Meets on Mondays, every other Monday for 2 hours. And that group has also grown and is another group of guys that I call dear friends. And so those friendships, those fishing trips, those family gatherings with my son Thomas, my daughter-in-law Hope, and the gifts that they've given us, my wife Gracelyn and I, really, those are things that I want to hold on to, that I don't want to screw up, and I want to be able to finish well. I want to, I'd love to be able to hear those words, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." But during that 40 years of wandering, before I figured out that that real joy, Jesus, others, and then yourself, before I figured out what true joy was about, I was chasing worldly success, not biblical success. And the thing I really love about this book is that it does help us identify what true success is about. And in here, I just want to read a couple of things that Coach Wooden, work and planning, that hard work. I only have control over myself. It says he wants us to work as if we are doing it as a gift to him. Work with enthusiasm as though you were working for the Lord rather than for people. He worked for God's glory. Hard work as a gift to the Lord. It took me a long time to figure that out. I love this country, but there are some things that, really confine us on being able to share our faith openly at work. And I respect those, not being able to proselytize in the workplace, I think is a good thing, because there are others that need to hear the good news because maybe they don't have a faith or they come from a different background, but there are opportunities, I think, to have those discussions, to help them question. I think when you're confronted with truth, you start to question if you have no faith or from a different faith, what is truth. And so, Coach Wooden says that planning and organization. Do I make my plans but then present them to the Lord so He can direct my steps? Do I do that? I do now. I didn't always do that. And I think through prayer, I think when you don't do that, as he says here, it's counterproductive. They had no reason, he's talking about his players, they had no reason to hold anything back. As a result, they worked harder during the scheduled time, as I mentioned before. And they got more done in a shorter amount of time. They're capable of becoming work hard. They were intentional about hard work. I think, if anybody's had a really serious illness before, you really start to recognize the fact that are people, do they respect you for your position at work, or do they respect you for the person that you are? Because you can feel really isolated sometimes when things start to take away, or you're in that transition between work and retirement. Because is your identity in your work, or is your identity in Christ? Because if your identity is in work, when you leave work, as I did when I retired, you really start to have a sense of loss. It's almost like going through a death experience. Because if your identity truly is wrapped up in your work, then you need to look at some of these building blocks and identify, how do I build and how do I hold everything together through my faith? And because you're here at 6:30 in the morning, you're doing everything right. You're building those characteristics of faith that I think are essential to being able to walk away, and or when you reflect on everything as you take your last few breaths, to know that you were successful in life. And so the last few things, to commit with your whole heart, to be zealous and passionate. God wants us to be that way about Him and His Son. He wants us to be that way about becoming all that He designed us to be. And so there are some questions for your breakout that I want you to consider. And if I push this too fast, it goes forward really slow. Did I push it too fast or too slow? Let me try it again. All right. So I took out of the book, the other thing I really like about this book is there are some reflective questions. And as Chris said, this is a really easy book to read. It's thin. And if you're not a reader, it's an easy read. It's an interesting read because you see the backdrop, behind some of the things of his success as a coach in the NCAA. Some of the really successful players that he coached over the years, names you'll recognize for sure. As his co-author, Cardi, talks about, there's your turn in the back. So this is your turn. So in your groups, as you talk about and answer and just kick around, how do you know when you're successful? From a worldly perspective, from God's perspective, what would your mosaic of pictures look like if you were to put one together and try to define success for yourself? If you were to write, what your values are, what your perspectives are on life, what is it that you would not compromise in life and hold on to? So from a worldly perspective, from God's perspective, how do you view success? Try to answer these questions. How do you build the characteristics of godly success? So talk about how do you do that? What is it that you do intentionally to include God and friends in your planning and your labors? And then how can you develop enthusiasm towards those things that you find less enjoyable in life? And so if you don't enjoy raking leaves, you can let the wind blow them in your neighbor's yard, or you can get out there with some enthusiasm and maybe make a big pile and let the neighbor kids jump in them. But I'm leaving you with these questions, and each week there'll be different sets of questions around the different building blocks of the pyramid of success. But thank you for the opportunity to share the first three chapters with you. So thank you.